More than 90% of people have heard of King Solomon, the man described in sacred texts as the wisest human to ever live. Yet almost none of them know that there exists a manuscript hidden for centuries, claiming that Solomon didn't just speak to God, he spoke to demons. The Testament of Solomon is one of those rare works that feels like it shouldn't exist. A bridge between heaven and hell, reason and madness. It's not a legend invented in the Middle Ages. The oldest known copies date back to the 1st or 2nd century AD, long before the Crusades, long before Christianity had even solidified its own texts. Imagine this, a biblical king conducting what looks like an ancient psychological experiment, summoning invisible beings, asking them who they are, what they do to humans, and how they can be defeated. When Carl Jung wrote about the shadow, the dark part of the psyche that every person hides, he may not have realized that Solomon described the same process almost 2,000 years earlier. Jung spoke of the unconscious. Solomon called them spirits. Both describe the same war inside every human mind, between clarity and chaos, between divine purpose and temptation. The testament begins like a confession. Solomon tells us that one of his workers, a young boy, was being tormented every night by an invisible being that sucked his life energy through his thumb. Desperate, Solomon prayed to God. The archangel Michael appeared and gave him a ring bearing the seal of God, a pentagram engraved on stone, a symbol older than any church, meant to command spiritual forces. From that moment, Solomon wasn't just a king, he became a mediator between light and darkness. He used the ring to summon the entity tormenting the boy. What followed was not an exorcism, but an interrogation. Solomon didn't scream prayers or cast fire. He asked questions. Who are you? What is your name? What do you do to men? The entity replied, revealing not only its nature but also the precise way it could be defeated. Each demon he summoned followed the same pattern. Each one represented a specific human flaw, a destructive impulse, a desire that once identified could be controlled. It's hard not to see the psychological brilliance behind this ancient text. Modern therapy often asks patients to name their fears, because naming them takes away their power. In the Testament, Solomon does exactly that thousands of years earlier. The demons speak one after another, sometimes proud, sometimes fearful. Some identify themselves as spirits of jealousy, rage, lust, or deceit. Others claim dominion over natural forces, the sea, the moon, disease, even earthquakes. Every revelation in the book feels like a mirror to human experience. When a demon tells Solomon, "I cause men to forget their purpose," who among us hasn't felt that invisible force? The lethargy that pulls us away from meaning, the distraction that blinds us from our own goals. Archaeologists and historians have long debated whether the Testament was meant to be literal or symbolic. But symbolism does not make it less real. Einstein once said that imagination is more important than knowledge, because knowledge defines what we already know, but imagination defines everything we might yet understand. The Testament of Solomon sits exactly in that space, between fact and myth, between religious doctrine and psychological truth. Its power doesn't depend on whether you believe Solomon actually spoke to demons. Its power lies in the idea that he dared to confront them instead of running away. Even the ring itself, the Seal of Solomon, became one of the most enduring symbols in esoteric history. It appears in Kabbalistic texts, in alchemical manuscripts, in Islamic mysticism, and even on ancient amulets used for protection. The symbol transcended religion because it represented something universal: the mind's ability to order chaos. Just as Solomon commanded spirits, we command our inner demons when we face them directly, name them, and learn from them. The Testament is not a story of horror. It's a story of knowledge disguised as darkness. When you read it or hear it, you sense the unease of a man too wise for his time, a man realizing that power without understanding becomes its own curse. And maybe that's why this text was hidden for so long, because it speaks of truth too complex for simple faith. It suggests that salvation doesn't come from avoiding evil, but from learning its language. Solomon's dialogue with the shadows is not a descent into madness. It's a reminder that even the brightest light casts a shadow, and only those who dare to look into it can truly understand themselves. According to the ancient manuscript, Solomon didn't stumble upon his power. It was given to him, deliberately, by a force that existed beyond human comprehension. The text says that the archangel Michael, the protector and warrior of God, appeared before Solomon and placed in his hand a ring made of brass and iron. On its surface was carved the seal of God, a five-pointed star surrounded by the name that only angels dared to pronounce. It wasn't an ornament, it was an instrument of command. Whoever held it could bind spirits and demand truth from them. In modern psychology, power is often described as an illusion. Control is limited, everything can collapse in a second. But the Testament paints a different image. Solomon's ring represents divine authority rooted not in fear, but in alignment. He didn't force the demons to obey him through violence. He commanded them because his intention was pure, his purpose aligned with the divine order. This subtle distinction matters. In life, influence without alignment becomes manipulation. Influence with alignment becomes wisdom. Solomon's story shows that even the darkest entities respond to clarity of purpose. The first time Solomon used the ring, the air trembled. He flung it toward the invisible being draining the boy's soul, and instantly the entity screamed, shackled by an unseen chain. It begged for release. But Solomon, calm, demanded its name and purpose. The demon revealed itself as Ornias, a spirit that feeds on the energy of the young and weak. He confessed that his power came from the movement of the stars, specifically the constellation of Aquarius, and that he was subject to the command of the archangel Uriel. This wasn't random myth. It mirrored the ancient belief that celestial bodies influence human emotion and fate, a concept now echoed in both astrology and modern chronobiology. Thousands of years before neuroscience, the Testament hinted that invisible patterns rule human behavior. What fascinates scholars today is the intelligence hidden in these dialogues. Solomon's ring didn't just bind demons, it forced them to reveal their structure, their law. In one passage, Solomon learns that every spirit operates under the authority of a specific angel, suggesting that every destructive force has an opposite, every darkness a counterweight of light. That simple truth, balance, is the foundation of nearly every spiritual and psychological system since. Lao Tzu called it yin and yang. Jung called it integration. Solomon discovered it through confrontation. The ring became a symbol not only of divine authority, but of consciousness itself. To hold the ring was to become aware, to realize that what torments us isn't random evil, but fragmented parts of a larger harmony. When the demon confesses its master's name, Solomon uses the ring to command the corresponding angel, and light overcomes shadow. This wasn't about exorcism, it was about transformation through knowledge. And that's what makes the Testament so radically modern. It doesn't separate magic from wisdom, it fuses them. The ring's dual composition, brass and iron, also carries deep symbolism. Brass, a mix of copper and zinc, represents creation and balance, while iron signifies will and strength. Together, they embody the union of spiritual insight and grounded action. It's the same principle found in today's personal transformation philosophies. Wisdom means nothing if it isn't applied. Solomon's ring worked because he acted. He asked, listened, tested. Like a scientist of the soul, he recorded what each spirit said, creating what might be humanity's first spiritual field manual. The manuscript also describes moments where Solomon felt fear, brief but telling. The ring didn't make him invincible. Some spirits resisted, some deceived. He learned that even divine tools could fail if the heart was not steady. It's a reminder for anyone chasing control or enlightenment. The tool is never enough. It's the consciousness behind it that determines the outcome. Even with God's seal in hand, Solomon had to remain vigilant, aware that knowledge can elevate or destroy, depending on who wields it. The Testament insists that the ring's true power wasn't in commanding others, but in revealing truth, the kind of truth that strips away illusion. Imagine if you had a symbol, a practice, that forced everything false in your life to confess, your fears, your desires, your self-deceptions. That was Solomon's reality. The ring gave him more than authority over spirits. It gave him the courage to face the hidden architecture of existence itself. And yet, this gift came with a silent warning. Each time Solomon used the ring, he stepped further into realms humans weren't meant to linger in. The boundary between servant and master, between seeker and ruler, began to blur. He started asking himself the question that haunts every seeker of knowledge: if I can command darkness, what stops me from becoming it? In the Testament of Solomon, this is where the story begins to darken. The tone shifts from divine wonder to something colder, investigative, almost surgical. Solomon, armed with the seal, begins a series of interrogations unlike anything in ancient literature. One by one he summons the spirits, not to destroy them but to understand them. Each one is forced to reveal its name, its power, the harm it causes to humanity, and the angel or divine word that can restrain it. The result reads like a fusion of theology, psychology, and forbidden science. The first demon to appear after Ornias is a shadow named Beelzebul, later known in Christian writings as Beelzebub, the Lord of the Flies. But here he isn't merely an evil caricature, he speaks with pride and clarity. I am the ruler of all demons, he tells Solomon, the fallen one who sits below the stars. He claims to command legions of spirits that manipulate kings and sow confusion among men. It's chilling, but there's logic in his words. Beelzebul describes the structure of corruption. It begins with pride, spreads through hierarchy, and disguises itself as reason. Modern psychology would later echo this. Power itself tends to create the illusion of control, leading to self-deception. Then comes Asmodeus, the spirit of lust and chaos. He introduces himself as the one who plots against newlyweds and drives men to madness through desire. His description matches later Jewish and Islamic traditions, where Asmodeus is the embodiment of passion turned poison. He admits to causing wars and destruction through temptation. When Solomon asks how he can be subdued, Asmodeus replies, "By the angel Raphael and by the liver of a fish." That detail seems bizarre, until you realize it comes directly from the Book of Tobit, another ancient text. These cross-references suggest that the Testament's author wasn't inventing a story. He was compiling knowledge, gathering fragments from older mystical sources, merging folklore, magic, and scripture into one cosmic map. The more Solomon questions, the more the demons resemble fragments of the human condition. A spirit named Ruach claims to cause headaches and migraines. Another named Barsaphael governs fevers and infections. There's one that whispers in women's ears to lure them into vanity, and another that blinds men to justice. These aren't monsters. They're metaphors for suffering described in the language of their time. Before medicine, before psychology, Solomon recorded human afflictions as living forces that could be understood and neutralized. The deeper message: everything that torments us has a pattern, a logic. If you learn its name and its cause, you can set yourself free. This idea resonates even today. Neuroscientists like Andrew Huberman often remind us that emotion and biology are inseparable. Every fear, addiction, or desire has a neurochemical counterpart. The ancient text intuited this connection long before science could measure it. When Solomon binds the demon of rage, for instance, he describes how it enters through the blood and stirs fire in the heart. That's a poetic description of adrenaline and cortisol, the same hormones that modern medicine links to anger and aggression. The Testament transforms spiritual war into an early map of the human nervous system, but the dialogues aren't only scientific, they're moral lessons wrapped in darkness. One demon, named Envy, tells Solomon, "I make men compare themselves to others until they lose sight of their blessings." Another, called Deception, whispers, "I teach them to justify their lies until truth becomes unbearable." When Solomon binds them, he doesn't just silence them, he makes them work. The text describes how he forces each spirit to contribute to the building of the temple of God. Symbolically, this is profound. The same forces that once destroyed become the materials of sacred creation. What once corrupted man now constructs the divine. It's the oldest idea in spiritual alchemy, transmutation through awareness. Imagine applying that principle to your own life. The anger that once consumed you could become your strength. The fear that once froze you could sharpen your intuition. Solomon's dialogues with the demons are not ancient superstition. They're a guide to integration. To face your darkness not as an enemy but as a teacher. Every confession the demons give in the Testament reveals a spiritual law still relevant today. Nothing inside you is beyond redemption once it's seen clearly. Yet the danger was always there. Solomon's fascination began to border on obsession. The text grows uneasy. Some passages describe him laughing as he commands legions to appear before him, his curiosity overpowering his caution. The same wisdom that brought him closer to God now tempts him to play God. Knowledge begins to intoxicate. The ring that once symbolized divine authority becomes a mirror of his own pride. And like every seeker who stares too long into the abyss, Solomon begins to realize that the abyss has started to look back. By the time Solomon had summoned dozens of spirits, the line between his investigation and his introspection began to blur. The Testament of Solomon stops feeling like a story about demons and starts reading like the diary of a man dissecting his own mind. Each interrogation, each revelation, each name carved into his records wasn't just about external forces, but about the hidden anatomy of his own soul. What began as an act of divine obedience was now transforming into something far more dangerous: self-discovery without limits. Modern psychologists estimate that up to 95% of human behavior is governed by the subconscious. Jung, Freud, and even Viktor Frankl agreed on one thing: that the greatest battle a man can face is not against the world, but within his own psyche. The Testament reads like an ancient prototype of this truth. Every demon Solomon questioned behaved like a repressed impulse: jealousy, lust, wrath, greed, all the fragments that dwell inside us but remain unseen until we shine light upon them. What Solomon was doing thousands of years before psychoanalysis was naming the unconscious. One scene in particular reveals this inner awakening. Solomon summons a demon called Obizuth, a female spirit who admits to haunting women during childbirth. In that era, infant mortality was tragically common. Fear surrounded pregnancy. But instead of condemning her, Solomon listens. She confesses that she causes suffering out of envy for those who bring life into the world. Solomon then asks which angel defeats her, and she replies, Raphael. When he commands Raphael's name, the spirit trembles and retreats. The symbolism is staggering. Healing, Raphael means God heals, overcomes destruction, born of envy. It's not just a theological idea, it's psychology. Envy loses its power when it's met with empathy and awareness instead of judgment. The deeper Solomon goes, the more he understands that each demon represents not a curse, but a distortion of something once pure. Pride is love of self without humility. Lust is love of beauty without restraint. Fear is caution without faith. This realization becomes the core of Solomon's revelation, that evil is not a separate entity, but an imbalance. It's what happens when a natural human drive loses connection with its divine source. In this light, the ring he wears becomes more than a magical object. It's consciousness itself, the ability to see clearly, to hold the tension between darkness and light without collapsing into either. But Solomon's self-awareness comes with a cost. The more he understands, the more he feels the weight of that knowledge. Imagine confronting every hidden part of yourself and realizing they're all speaking at once. That's what the Testament captures, the noise of enlightenment. Solomon begins to see that his temple, the sacred structure he's building, is both physical and internal. Every stone placed by bound spirits mirrors an aspect of his own psyche brought into alignment. It's not simply architecture, it's integration. He is constructing the order of his mind through the discipline of his will. The text even records moments of humility, rare for a king. Solomon admits fear, exhaustion, even doubt in God's plan. He wonders whether his relentless questioning is holy or arrogant. These passages make the Testament so human, so modern. Anyone who has sought meaning deeply enough knows that moment when knowledge stops comforting you and starts stripping you bare. Who am I, Solomon asks, to command what even angels fear? It's not just a question of faith, it's the eternal question of power and self. Psychologists today would call what Solomon experienced integration of the shadow. But in spiritual language, it's purification. He's learning that mastery isn't dominance, it's surrender to understanding, that the more you control, the less you actually see. The demons were never his enemies, they were his teachers in disguise. Each confession revealed a law of balance, a mechanism of reality. Every negative force carries its antidote within it. To heal lust, seek sacred connection. To dissolve pride, practice gratitude. To overcome fear, embrace faith. Solomon was building a map of human nature long before science could measure the brain, yet there's tension in the air as the narrative progresses. The more he peers into the abyss, the more reflections he sees, faces that look like his own, voices that echo his doubts. The text begins to imply that some of the demons recognize him, as though they are aspects of his being reflected back. "You command me, Solomon," one spirit says, "but who commanded you to command?" The line sends a chill through history, the moment when the seeker realizes that the darkness he studies has already taken residence within him. And so, the king who once sought to understand the world now begins to confront himself. The ring's glow, once a symbol of divine clarity, becomes a mirror, showing not just power but responsibility. Every question he asks a spirit rebounds toward his own heart. Why do men destroy what they love? Why does wisdom breed loneliness? Why does light cast a shadow? These are not the questions of a sorcerer. They are the questions of every human soul on the path of awakening. The Testament of Solomon shifts tone once again. What began as a tale of demons and divine authority now turns into something even more mysterious, a revelation about the fabric of reality itself. As Solomon's understanding deepens, the building of the temple becomes the living symbol of everything he has learned. It is not simply a monument to God, it is a machine of consciousness, a map of cosmic laws rendered in stone. Historians estimate that Solomon's temple would have required more than 150,000 laborers, a workforce that seems impossible for the time. The Testament claims something extraordinary. The demons themselves, now bound by the power of the seal, were the ones who carried the stones, cut the materials, and aligned the geometry. The image is staggering. The forces of chaos, once destructive, now constructing the most sacred structure on earth. The message is alchemical, transformation through service. Darkness, when enlightened, becomes energy. Evil, when understood, becomes order. But the text goes deeper. It describes Solomon commanding the spirits to sing as they worked, each voice producing a frequency that vibrated through the stones. The walls were said to hum like living matter. Ancient esoteric traditions claim that sound is not just music, it's architecture. Pythagoras, centuries later, would speak of the music of the spheres, the idea that the universe itself operates on harmonic resonance. Even modern physics, through string theory, whispers a similar idea, that vibration, not matter, is the foundation of all existence. The Testament anticipated this truth long before science could articulate it. When Solomon directs the demons to carve the temple, he doesn't give them arbitrary commands. He gives them symbols, proportions, and measures, aligned with celestial patterns, the same ratios later found in sacred geometry, from the pyramids of Egypt to Gothic cathedrals. Every stone, every beam, corresponded to a cosmic principle. It wasn't superstition. It was an encoded science of harmony, based on the understanding that human consciousness could tune itself to divine order through sound, proportion, and intention. There's a moment in the manuscript where Solomon reflects on the harmony of the construction. He writes, "When they sang, the stones became light, and when they stopped, the air grew heavy." This isn't poetic exaggeration. It describes an ancient awareness of vibration and resonance that modern researchers still study today. Sound can indeed move matter. Experiments in cymatics, the science of visualizing sound frequencies, show sand and water forming perfect geometric patterns under specific tones. Solomon's temple, if read symbolically, was a living cymatic structure, a standing wave of faith. It's not difficult to see the metaphor for the human mind. Our thoughts are vibrations, our words, frequencies. When Solomon harmonizes demons to build a temple, he's teaching us something timeless, that the energies which once destroyed us can be repurposed to build meaning, if directed by consciousness. You can't destroy fear, but you can transform it into courage. You can't erase anger, but you can channel it into purpose. Solomon's architecture was both physical and psychological. The Testament even alludes to numbers that mirror later mystical traditions. The number 7, the 7 heavens, the 7 metals, the 7 notes, appears repeatedly. It's no coincidence that there are also 72 spirits bound by Solomon, the same number later found in the Kabbalistic names of God. These patterns suggest that the author understood something profound, that order in the cosmos is reflected in order within the self. The temple wasn't a building for worship, it was a mirror of the soul, perfectly tuned to divine mathematics. But here lies the forbidden aspect, the tension between science and sanctity. As Solomon's mastery grows, so does his pride. He begins to realize that he can bend not just demons, but matter itself. He starts asking, if sound and geometry can move stone, what could they do to the human spirit? The more he experiments, the more he edges toward transgression, seeking knowledge that even angels might fear. The Testament implies that Solomon's fascination with vibration, energy, and control began to overstep divine law. He wasn't building for God anymore. He was testing God's creation. It's here that we see a reflection of every seeker, every scientist, every philosopher who touches truth too closely. There's always that moment, when understanding tempts the ego, when the Creator forgets he's part of creation. In the Testament's final construction scenes, the temple glows with divine radiance, yet Solomon's tone grows heavy. He writes of feeling the pulse of the earth, as though the structure itself had awakened, watching him back. Even in modern terms, we know what this means. Technology gives us power, artificial intelligence, genetic manipulation, sound healing, yet every innovation forces us to face a moral question. Just because we can, should we? The Testament was warning us long before modern ethics existed. Solomon's temple was more than an achievement, it was a test. Could humanity bear divine knowledge without becoming intoxicated by it? The answer was already forming quietly in the cracks of the temple walls. Solomon's quest for harmony was reaching its climax, but beneath that perfect geometry, a shadow was beginning to stir again. Power always begins as a gift and ends as a test. In the Testament of Solomon, that test arrives silently, without thunder or divine wrath. It begins within the king himself. As the temple nears completion, Solomon, once humble and guided by divine purpose, begins to feel something new, the weight of omnipotence. The same mind that once sought understanding now hungers for more. The same ring that once served God now tempts him to play God. The fall doesn't come from ignorance, it comes from brilliance without balance. History has repeated this pattern endlessly. Oppenheimer, after the first atomic bomb, whispered the words of the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Knowledge without humility burns through every age the same way, and Solomon, centuries earlier, was its first living symbol. The text describes how he begins to question not the demons, but the angels. He demands to know why evil exists if God is good. He asks why the same divine power that allows him to command darkness also allows suffering in the world. It's not arrogance at first, it's curiosity. But curiosity can be the doorway to chaos when the heart is unguarded. The Testament tells us that Solomon's downfall began with love, or what he believed was love. A woman from a foreign land enters his court, radiant and mysterious. Some versions call her a princess of Egypt, others a devotee of Moloch, the god of fire. She demands a single proof of his devotion, that he worship her gods as she worships them. The same man who once commanded legions of spirits hesitates. He believes his wisdom will protect him. He believes he can taste forbidden fire and not be burned. And so, the wisest of men allows a single act of blasphemy, and the curse begins. It's in this moment that the Testament of Solomon turns from revelation to tragedy. The king who once ruled darkness now finds himself ruled by it. The text says that the ring, the divine seal, was stolen from him by a spirit in the form of an eagle. The creature flies away, dropping the ring into the sea. Without it, Solomon is stripped of authority. The demons he once bound now mock him. The harmony of his temple begins to crumble. The balance he maintained between light and shadow collapses into chaos. For the first time, Solomon experiences what ordinary men feel every day: fear, confusion, weakness. It's as if the universe itself is reminding him that no man, no matter how wise, can wield divine knowledge without divine restraint. Modern thinkers might call it a collapse of ego. Spiritually, it's a fall from grace. Psychologically, it's what happens when consciousness loses its anchor and drowns in its own reflection. The Testament doesn't portray Solomon as evil. It portrays him as human. He begins to wander, praying, repenting, realizing that the power he lost was never truly his. It belonged to something higher. This echoes a universal truth found across all wisdom traditions. In Buddhism, attachment leads to suffering. In Gnosticism, false enlightenment leads to madness. In the Stoic writings of Marcus Aurelius, pride is described as the enemy of peace. Solomon's fall wasn't divine punishment. It was the natural consequence of imbalance, of knowledge disconnected from humility. Yet even in his fall, the Testament hides a second lesson, perhaps the most profound of all. The ring that fell into the sea was eventually swallowed by a fish. Later, that fish was caught and served to Solomon himself. When he opened it, the ring lay inside. Think about that. The symbol of divine authority lost through pride returns through nature, through simplicity, through nourishment. It's as if the universe was saying wisdom returns when you stop chasing it. Power finds you when you no longer crave it. That moment of recovery is the true redemption of Solomon. It shows that even the fallen can rise, not by conquering again, but by surrendering. The demons that once built his temple, the pride that destroyed it, the pain that humbled him, all become part of his final understanding. True wisdom is cyclical. It begins with curiosity, matures through mastery, and completes itself through surrender. If we translate that into modern life, it's the same cycle many of us live without realizing it. We chase knowledge to control our world. We master it to define ourselves. And only when it collapses, when a relationship ends, when success turns hollow, when purpose fades, do we finally learn what Solomon learned, that power without meaning is nothing. The Testament doesn't end in despair. It ends in silence, a silence that sounds almost sacred. The great king has faced both angels and demons and found them both inside himself. When he finally holds the ring again, he no longer uses it to command. He uses it to pray. The same symbol that once summoned darkness now channels gratitude. And perhaps that's why the Testament of Solomon survived centuries of suppression. Because buried beneath the myth, it reveals a truth that transcends time, that the path to divine power always leads through the fall, and only through the fall can one return whole. Centuries have passed, and yet the Testament of Solomon still whispers to anyone who dares to read between its lines. It's not merely an ancient tale about a king and his command over unseen forces. It's a map of the human condition encoded in myth. Even today, theologians, psychologists, and mystics revisit its verses, searching for something modern science cannot quantify: the dialogue between consciousness and its shadow. What remains astonishing is how relevant Solomon's revelation still feels in a world obsessed with control, technology, and self-image. If the first half of the Testament is about mastery, the second is about surrender. Solomon's wisdom wasn't destroyed by his fall, it was purified by it. He learned that light doesn't exist without darkness, and that the mind that tries to dominate reality only deepens its illusion. Every one of us, in our own lives, repeats that same pattern. We spend years building temples of ambition, careers, identities, reputations, and only when they begin to crumble do we glimpse the truth that Solomon finally saw, that peace isn't found in conquest but in comprehension. The manuscript ends with Solomon acknowledging his flaws and asking that others learn from his mistakes. It's an ending stripped of grandeur, a king kneeling before the invisible law that governs all creation. In that humility lies the real secret. The power of the seal wasn't the ability to command demons, it was the wisdom to transform them. Every voice he summoned, every force he named, was part of a universal equation. Energy without direction becomes destruction, but energy with awareness becomes creation. That law applies as much to our emotions as it did to his spirits. Take modern psychology. Studies show that suppressing negative emotion increases its intensity by over 40%. Awareness, on the other hand, reduces its control dramatically. What Solomon called binding demons is what therapists today call integration. The Testament predicted it in symbolic form. Every shadow we face, anger, fear, envy, doubt, loses its power the moment it's named, understood, and given purpose. The ring then becomes a metaphor for consciousness itself, a reminder that understanding is the truest form of exorcism. It's also remarkable how the Testament bridges ancient mysticism with modern science. The text describes sound as a creative force. When they sang, the stones became light. Modern physicists now speak of vibration as the essence of matter. Neuroscientists confirm that emotion alters the body's frequency, reshaping even cellular patterns. Solomon's insight wasn't mythic, it was proto-scientific. He discovered what spiritual masters and quantum theorists would echo centuries later. Reality responds to consciousness. The temple wasn't built only from stone, it was tuned by intention. But the most transformative legacy of the Testament is moral. It teaches that knowledge divorced from virtue corrupts, yet virtue without knowledge stagnates. Both must evolve together. The text survives as a warning to any era that worships intellect without conscience, and that warning feels urgent today. We command machines, we manipulate genes, we create artificial minds, yet we still struggle to master our own. Solomon's tragedy was that he reached divine power before achieving divine humility. His redemption came when he understood that the true seal of God is not carved on metal, but engraved on the human heart. The capacity to discern, to forgive, to balance power with compassion. When scholars in the 20th century rediscovered fragments of the Testament in Greek and Coptic manuscripts, many dismissed it as superstition. Yet others, depth psychologists, Kabbalists, mystics, saw in it the DNA of human evolution. It's a story that begins with domination and ends with integration, the same arc followed by every genuine seeker. Whether you call them demons, shadows, or neural patterns, the forces Solomon confronted still live within us. His legacy is the courage to face them, to ask their names, and to turn their darkness into structure, to build a temple within, one stone of awareness at a time. In the end, the Testament doesn't offer salvation through faith alone. It offers transformation through understanding. It reminds us that even the wisest fall, that even the fallen can rise, and that every fall, if embraced consciously, becomes an ascent. Light doesn't banish darkness, it redeems it. That's the secret Solomon left behind for all ages, that the divine isn't found by escaping the abyss, but by learning to speak with it. The Testament of Solomon closes not with a command, but with silence, the same silence that follows realization. And if you listen closely, that silence still vibrates today. It's in the quiet moment between thoughts, in the breath before forgiveness, in the pause where awareness replaces reaction. That's where Solomon's true temple still stands, not in Jerusalem, not in ruins, but inside every human being who chooses to face their own shadows and turn them, at last, into light.